Right, so first order of business today. While I still have your undivided attention, more or less undivided, I hope, I do want to remind you, right, you have a homework assignment. It's in the Writing Analytically textbook for Thursday, right? What you are going to do is going to select a visual image and you're going to write a short analysis of it, right? The directions are in the textbook. It's up to you what sort of image you want to use, and the textbook will give you a method for picking the image apart, which we will then discuss in more detail when we go over the homework on Thursday. Right, we'll do a couple more exercises that will try to reinforce those things. Yeah, please.
So is it due Thursday?
The homework is going to be due Thursday, yeah. But it'll be due, so bring it to class with you. And then you will upload the homework to the Georgia View Dropbox. There is a Dropbox of the homework. I did get some questions about Dropboxes for the poems. Those you just bring to class. And you'll turn them in at the end of class. Or maybe not, depending on sort of where we go with it. Yes, Matthew.
For the assignment that's due on Thursday, do you want us to bring an image of what we're describing? Like the actual picture?
Yes, provide the image as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're going to select a visual image, preferably some kind of art image, from like a fine art book or from a magazine or something like that. You will attach the image to your analysis of it, and you'll upload all of it as one file, please, to the appropriate Dropbox in Georgia View. The Dropbox will be easy to spot. Any other questions about the homework assignment? Okay, if you have questions while you're working, please do shoot me an email. Now, let's talk a little bit about the poem that I asked you to write for today. How'd this go for you?
Pretty well.
Okay, some of you are saying, yeah, great, this went well, and others said, this was hard. Okay, those of you for whom this was difficult, what was difficult about it? What did you have trouble with? Okay, so the most difficult thing to do was just coming up with a topic. So how did you ultimately arrive at something to write about?
I looked around my room and saw something.
So you essentially just wait for inspiration to hit you?
Yes.
Okay. That's one way of doing it.
I picked something kind of simple.
Okay. Something that you figured would be easy to describe.
For me, it was just, we were in the Anglo Saxon, we're kind of in that culture right now. So
Okay.
That's where my mindset was, so it ended up being something related to Anglo Saxon culture is what I ultimately ended up writing about.
Okay, so what you tried to do was let the history and the form dictate your subject. Okay. Now, I don't want any of you, by the way, to tell me or each other yet what you wrote about it. I think part of the interest of all this will be guessing what your what it is exactly you're describing. What else did you guys have, like, apart from just coming up with a topic, what else was difficult?
Making it alliterate.
Okay, yeah. Alliteration, we do it all the time in our speech, often unconsciously, but if we actually have to sit down and arrange words in a way that alliterates, right, it makes it much, much more difficult, right? So how did you get around the difficulty of it? How do you think you managed the alliteration? Do you think you did it all? You think you did it right? You think you got it? A couple of you are saying no. Did you have to fudge at certain points? How badly do you feel you had to fudge?
Kind of gave up.
Okay.
I had to dig into the source a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Okay.
because I knew which words I wanted to use, but I was like, well, that doesn't really fit the alliteration, so I tried to rack my brain to see if I could find anything kind of similar
Mm-hmm.
that would fit.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, right? So you know what you're trying to describe, you know what you're going for, so you look for other words that describe more or less the same thing. Yeah, that you figure you can alliterate with. This is one of the issues with writing poetry in general, right, is you kind of have to think about what the whole thing is going to look like before you've even really started writing it. Right, you have to have at least some sort of plan or vision for the whole. And having a structure that you're assigned to write to, I think can help with that. So, okay, you have to follow these particular rules, but particularly if you're being asked to do things you're not really used to doing, yeah, it can be hard to get your head around it. And there's a certain theory of poetic language, right, that argues that what poetry does is defamiliarize the everyday and the mundane. Right? It's a special use of language that forces you to look at familiar objects, familiar things, through a different kind of lens. Right? You have to look at it in ways you're not used to looking at it. So how many of you think that ultimately you came up with a pretty good poem? Several of you are not so sure? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Anglo Saxon poetry more generally, how it works, where it comes from, and I'm going to give you the opportunity, if we finish up a little bit early at the end of class, to improve yours a little bit if you want to, before you turn it in. So what you'll do, instead of turning it in at the end of class, you will have until 8 p.m. tonight. And you'll just email it to me. Okay? And then what I'll do, I'll take your name off it. I'll compile them all into a document. I'll post that on Georgia View for everybody to look at. It'll be in a folder called Student Poems. And by next Monday, now this is a Tuesday, Thursday class, by next Tuesday, I want you to select the poem you think is the best, right? And the person who gets the most votes gets 2 extra points. Okay, any questions? All right, great. Then let's jump into Anglo Saxon Elegy. Now, when you look across these 3 poems, do you notice anything they have in common with each other? Anything that strikes you as sort of okay, this is something that must be a typical feature?
Too damn sad. Melancholic.
Okay.
They all seem to talk about something that was left alone or vulnerable in some way.
Okay.
Or solitude, like,
Vulnerability, solitude. Good. Anything else? Any particular particular image that seems to carry across all 3? Yeah, Ayana.
Death, not necessarily like people dying, but just things not
Like
existing
getting
anymore.
Okay, yeah.
I would probably say kind of like desolation type deal.
Death and disappearance. Yeah, desolation is a good word for it.
Fate.
Okay. Why would you say fate?
It's just. It's kind of hard to say.
Okay, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
And in fact, along those lines, there is this concept that's mentioned in all 3 poems. Weird. Yeah. Weird is fate. According to the Anglo Saxon worldview, right, the moment and manner of your death was fixed from the time you were born. Right? This was your destiny, your weird. It was sometimes personified as a goddess. And there was really nothing you could do to change it. Right? It was up to you how you met it. It was up to you how you faced up to it. But, you know, if you are destined to have your leg bitten off by a wolf and to bleed to death, right? That's, sorry. That's your weird. That's your destiny. So yeah, there is, as you noted, like just a strain of fatalism in these poems, right? That this is inevitable. That decay, desolation, breakdown are inevitable. Now, do any of you know anything about the Anglo Saxons as a culture?
I learned about it in high school, but I don't remember.
Okay, what do you remember, if anything? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm not good at being on the spot.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like the culture.
Okay, I think so. I think somebody's trying to help you out here. Yes.
They were traditionally a warring people who lived in clans and
Mhm.
grew up around the culture of chivalry. So I do not directly remember what chivalry was about. It definitely dealt with benevolence in a sense, but it also had deeper dealings with morality.
Okay, when we talk about the Anglo-Saxons, we're actually talking about a sort of pre-chivalry culture. Yeah, chivalry is a sort of medieval French concept that is largely about how the higher orders of society should treat the lower orders of society. Right, so it's like a code of behavior for aristocrats, basically. The Anglo-Saxons are, it's the term we use to describe the culture that was dominant in England after the Romans left and before 1066. Does anybody know what happened in England in 1066 that changed the way we speak forever?
I know the 2 years before that was at 1050 when the Great Schism, is that date close or?
You're talking about like a religion thing, right?
Yeah, oh, it has nothing to do with
Yeah, this has nothing to do. This is just a historical event in England.
It's not like the Magna Carta was.
Nope, about 200. That's about 200 years later. In 1066, an army from France invades England, defeats the local warlords, and French becomes the language of the English aristocracy for several generations afterwards. So we'll talk a little bit in a later session about how this actually affects the way we speak. But we're talking about today the culture that dominated England from about 500 to about 1066.
Media, they're typically portrayed as like a very brutal people. Yeah,
Well,
that's in the media, and that might
sure.
not have many much
Sure.
historical accuracy, but
And, we are talking about an era in which life was kind of nasty, brutish, and short. But yeah, there was one thing, Forrest, that you did have. They lived in close-knit kin groups, right? So most people in an Anglo-Saxon village or an Anglo-Saxon town would have been related to each other somehow. They often married from outside the village or outside the immediate clan group. But yeah, by and large, the people you lived and grew up amongst were relatives. And they were held together by loyalty to a lord. Now, does anybody have any guesses based on the content of these poems how a lord gained and kept followers?
conquest.
Not necessarily through conquest, right? People don't generally like you very much if you kill their friends and take over their village.
Right.
If effectively is the bank of the town. When hordes are brought back from conquest, he divvies it up and pays the warriors.
Exactly, yes. The Lord gives gifts to his men to ensure their loyalty. Yeah, essentially, yeah. You pay them to you pay them to stick with you. You pay them to fight for you. You pay them to support you. And if you pay them generously, they'll stick by you. But if we're looking at a culture in which people have these close ties to a lord and to a kin group, what happens if you're the last surviving member of your kin group? Where does that leave you?
Isolated.
Dead end.
Yeah, you are isolated. What could you do? What seems to be the logical thing to do? All right, you're still relatively young.
Try to procreate.
Your work. Pardon?
Try to procreate, find
Married
somebody.
to a family.
Yeah, try to find another lord to serve.
Her crew.
Now, here's the thing.
Okay.
Here's the thing that makes this difficult. We're talking about a culture in which murder was essentially legal as long as you could pay for it, right? Raiding was essentially legal as long as you could pay for it. If you killed somebody, you had to pay their relatives what was called weregild, W-E-R-E-G-I-L-D, which translates literally to man price. Pardon?
It's like an eye for an
Well, more like a pile of gold for an eye. But yeah, I mean, similar sort of idea, right? Okay, you kill somebody, you have to pay their relatives what they feel that person's life was worth.
It was up to the discretion of the family to set the price.
It was the discretion of the victim's family to set the price, yes. Now, if you are in the service of a lord, he is responsible for your behavior. So let's say that, Bryce, you are an Anglo Saxon lord. Okay? You have your little village, your little close-knit kin group, and you distribute gold rings to all of your men generously so that they will protect your person. Bethany shows up, an unknown person, in the mead hall you have constructed to entertain your men. And she asks for you to take her in because she is the last of her kin group, right? If you agree and she does something wrong, you have to pay for her mistakes, right? You have to pay for what she does. So say, she goes to a neighboring village and steals a whole herd of cattle, right? She gets caught, you have to pay the owner of those cattle for damages. If she kills somebody, you have to pay the family of the victim. So this makes a lord often rather reluctant to take in a stranger. Right? I don't know you, I don't know where you're from, I don't know what your story is. Why don't you just keep moving along? So once your kin group is gone, once your clan is eliminated or whatever, chances are you're stuck. And that's the situation we have in at least two of these poems, right? In The Wanderer and the Seafarer, we have a speaker. Well, we have multiple speakers actually in The Wanderer, but we'll get to that in a minute. Who has outlived friends, family, and lord, and now just wanders alone looking for some other place to rest, right? So that's the basic subject matter of what is often referred to as an Anglo Saxon elegy. Now, what does this word elegy mean? Have any of you ever heard this word before?
No. sounds similar to eulogy.
It is similar to eulogy, yeah.
Looks like reminiscing,
Pardon?
like reminiscing the line.
Yeah. An elegy essentially is a memory poem. Yeah, the central action the speaker performs in an elegy usually is simply remembering. And in an Anglo Saxon elegy, this takes a particular shape, right? So let's look briefly at The Ruin, which is the shortest of the poems I asked you to look at for today. Right? If you have a printout of it, take that out. If you don't, please locate a neighbor who has it. If you have a tablet or something, you can call it up. Yeah, that's fine too. Just it would be best if everybody has the poem in front of them. All right, and just let me know when everybody has got something called up. Okay, The Ruin is slightly different from the other two poems. How is this poem not like the other two?
It's more about a place than a person.
Yeah. Does the speaker in the poem seem to have any kind of specific relationship to this place? No, he's just, yep, just somebody talking about a place, yeah. This is less about an individual's feelings and more about the history of the place, yeah, good. So if we look at the beginning of the poem, right, well wrought this wall, weirds broke it, the stronghold burst, snapped roof trees, towers fallen, the work of the giants, the stonesmith smoldereth, rime scoureth gate towers, rime on mortar. Shattered the shower shields, roofs ruined, age underate them, and the wielders in the rights, earth grip holds them, gone, long gone, fast in grave's grasp where 50 fathers and sons have passed. Now, I do want to draw your attention briefly to some of these words. Shower shields, earth grip, grave's grasp. What is it? What's a shower shield? Yeah, it's a roof. What about earth grip?
It's great.
Yeah, earth grip and grave's grasp are the same thing, right? Yeah, they both refer to death. So, Anglo-Saxon poetry makes use of these sort of compound metaphors. They're called kennings. They're formulaic phrases. You see the same ones frequently in different poems that we assume were written by different people. Right? So these are just three examples. Others include battle torch, whale road, gold friend. What do you think a battle torch is? Yeah, it's a sword. Why do you think it? Why is it a sword? Why does this work? What characteristics of a sword is this playing on?
Glint on the battlefield with the sword.
Yeah. You hold it in one hand like a torch, right? And it gleams. Good. What about the whale road? What is the whale road? Yeah. If you're thinking of the sea as something you traverse, right? Something you travel on. This one might be a little bit tougher because it's more culturally specific. Gold friend.
Like
Yeah, that's a lord, actually. Yeah, gold friend is a lord. The guy your friend who gives you gold. And loaf guard.
Bodyguard, soldier.
Not a bodyguard, no.
The older men in the meeting hall, maybe?
No, it actually, this also means your lord, right? The guy who protects your food and your livelihood. In fact, the actual Anglo Saxon version of this would be Lafward, which, if you condense it down, take out a lot of these extraneous consonants, what word is it? This is the root of our word Lord. Loaf guard. So that's where the word comes from. So what I'd like you to do for the next 5 minutes or so, right? Think of a couple of objects that you think you could make kennings for, right? And just try to make as many as you can. Right? Come up with clever little compound word metaphors for everyday objects. Probably easier if you can think of an object first. And then try to come up with a creative, with a creative compound word to describe it. Remember, just think of poetic language as seeing an everyday thing in a completely different way. And it need not be an Anglo-Saxon-y thing, right? So you don't have to think back to vague memories of the Hobbit movies or anything like that. Oh, you got something? Is that with the hand, or we just, okay. Take about another 2 minutes. So who managed to come up with something? Yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
Well, I thought about, just everything, and then I got to thinking, about me, and I thought about what
Mhm.
can I do? And it was easy for me to do a tongue, like I said, a word sword.
Okay.
Because it reminded me, the Bible says your tongue's kind of like a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
So it was easy for me to kind of draw that parallel.
Yeah, the idea of the tongue as a weapon, right? You can use this to wound. Yeah, good. Yeah, that's good. That's creative. All right, anybody else? Yeah, Ayana.
So I thought about trees.
Mhm.
And how the green holders, a lot of it, they're leaves and green.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Yeah, Bethany.
Like shoes, they like protect your feet, so they're like a foot guard.
Okay. Foot guards. Anybody else? Yes.
Okay, I thought about a knife, and it's really a food sword.
Okay. A food sword, yes, for going out and attacking your food. Swords on the brain here. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
Hat could be like head shield.
Head shield, yes. Particularly if you are often walking through fields of falling objects. And if you happen to live in a Roadrunner cartoon, that's probably a useful thing to have. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Gianna.
I thought about a ring, and I put finger belt.
All right. So the whole idea here, right? The idea behind metaphor generally is to take something that you see all the time and to break it down into its component parts and think about what other sorts of things it resembles, right? That might get us to think about a legitimate actual function of that thing or a legitimate actual feature of that thing. Right, that just draws attention to something about it that you don't normally see, that you don't normally think about. And the way the Anglo Saxon poets tended to do this was through the use of these formulaic kennings. Now, you've noticed probably here that a lot of these kennings also alliterate. And indeed, what is missing from these poems that you often expect to find in poetry? Yeah, there's no rhyme here, right? No rhyme at all. What we get instead is alliteration. What is rhyme supposed to do in a poem? What's the function of rhyme?
Top and flow.
Yeah, it on the one hand, it's like when you're reading, it's like, okay, yes, this is verse, I'm reading verse. There are rhymes here and there, right? What else might it, what other purpose might it serve?
So you read it in a certain way.
Okay, yeah, it can be a sort of signpost to the reader, right? This is what this is supposed to sound like. This is how this is supposed to go. Yeah. Rhyme is cute, right?
Fun.
It's fun.
Sure.
It's often funny. But what rhyme is actually meant to do, at least in modern and contemporary poetry, right, it actually is supposed to link ideas together. Right? So when you see a rhyme running through a poem, you're supposed to look at those words together, right? Not just in the context of the line they're in, but as a kind of pattern in and of themselves, right? They're not rhymed arbitrarily. Now, Anglo Saxon poetry doesn't do this, but they do still use repeated sounds to link words and ideas together. They just use alliteration instead. Now, there is a perfectly valid reason for this. It's actually still pretty difficult to rhyme in English. We don't have regular word endings the way a lot of other, like say Latin-derived languages do, French, Italian, Spanish, right? It's really, really easy to rhyme in those languages. And so virtually all forms of poetry in those languages do rhyme. In English, we often have to force it. And so in Old English, it's virtually impossible to rhyme. So what they do instead is alliterate.
Is that their way of conveying, like, this is what you need to pay attention to, these are the words that you need to group together?
Yeah, well, and I think that's the other thing as well. They tend to alliterate on stressed syllables. Right, so when you're reading poetry of any kind, right, it is a good idea to pay attention to which syllables are emphasized, right, where your voice goes up, where your voice is stronger. That's often the poet signaling to you where the important concepts are. And particularly in Anglo-Saxon poetry, right, the stressed alliterative syllables, right, yeah, these are the ideas, these are the things you really need to pay attention to. So, to go back to that image that we were talking about when we sort of took this little detour into kennings and alliteration, right? Well wrought this wall, weirds broke it, the stronghold burst. Snapped roof trees, towers fallen, the work of giants, the stonesmiths mouldereth, rhyme scoureth gate towers, rhyme on mortar, shattered the shower shields, roofs ruined, age underrate them, and the wielders in rights, earth grip holds them, gone, long gone. Fast in graves grass while 50 fathers and sons have passed. Walls stood, gray lichen, red stone, kings fell often. Stood under storms, high arch crashed. Stands yet the wall stone, hacked by weapons. By files, grim ground. Shown the old skilled work, sank to loam crust. Does anybody know, by the way, what these little ellipses mean?
Something else, there's something missing.
There's something missing. These are what are called lacunae. And you see them often in translations of old manuscripts. Yeah, it means the manuscript is damaged and there's a portion missing. So this is what they do to fill in the hole. Right, it means, what does that say? We don't know. Bless you.
Thank you.
So these first lines, are they describing the present, the past, the future? What temporal situation, like what time period do they seem to be describing?
If you're going down, it seems to be describing the past, because
It seems to me like it was describing like the glory days of this place.
Uh-huh.
Kind of.
Yeah, it moves into describing the past, right?
It starts off in the present, I feel like.
Yeah. So we begin in the present, and we gradually move into the past, right? First, the past the past in which this place was destroyed. And then we start to move into a more positive past, right? The place at its height. Mood, quick in mind, and a man of wit, cunning in rings, bound bravely the wall base with iron, a wonder. Bright were the buildings, halls where springs ran. High, horn-gabled, much throng noise. These many mead halls, men filled with loud cheerfulness. Weird changed that. Came days of pestilence, and all sides men fell dead. Death fetched off the flower of the people. Where they stood to fight, waste places on the Acropolis ruins. Hosts who would build again shrank to the earth. Therefore are these courts dreary, and that red arch twisteth tiles, rieth from roof ridge, reacheth groundwards, broken blocks. There once many a man mood glad, gold bright, of gleams garnished, flushed with wine pride, flashing war gear, gazed on wrought gemstones, on gold, on silver, on wealth held and hoarded, on light-filled amber, on this bright burg of broad dominion. Stood stone houses, wide streams welled hot from source, and a wall all caught in its bright bosom, that the baths were hot at hall's hearth. That was fitting. Thence hot streams, loosed, ran over hoar stone, unto the ring tank. It is a kingly thing. So, if we look at the difference in the way the place is described in its height and the way it's described in the present, what words seem to be associated with the place at its height? What words or images do we notice here?
Gold.
Okay, gold. Good, yes. This place was wealthy, right? There's flashing war gear, wrought gemstones, riches all over. Yeah, bathhouses. What kind of bathhouses specifically?
Hot.
Hot baths, yes. Right. A marvel of early medieval plumbing. This place would have had hot baths. Now, what about in the present? How is the present contrasted with the past?
Oh, it's
What words are associated with the place as it is now?
broken block.
Dreary.
Shattered.
Shattered, dreary. What else? Think in terms of these hot baths.
Cold.
Yeah. We have winter and frost imagery early in the poem, right? Rime scoureth gate towers, rime on mortars. Right, rime means frost. R-I-M-E. When you see that word, it means frost. So, this is where we see the most connection between this poem and the other two, right? It is conventional, it is typical in Anglo Saxon poetry to describe the present, the unpleasant, nasty present, where you are bereft of friends, bereft of home, bereft of lord, as being like winter. Right? The unpleasant now.
So they kind of view life as seasons type deal.
Yeah, maybe not quite so specific as that, but certainly they used seasonal imagery in this way. Now, did you notice any other images that are common to the wanderer and the seafarer? What do these two? What do these other two poems have in common with each other? There's the winter imagery that all three poems share, right? And all three poems do this thing where they compare a glorious past to a shitty present. What else what do these other two poems have in common? Any other particular images or tropes they seem to have in common with each other?
Kind of like a sense of aloneness to me, like that's kind of like the ideal.
Yeah, we're actually dealing with a sense of personal loneliness, right, in these other two poems. These poems are more typical of Anglo-Saxon elegy than the Ruin is. Usually we do have, in this kind of poem, a lonely speaker talking about their present existence. Right, so if you look at the Wanderer, we have at least two different speakers in this poem. Right, there's a narrator, sort of outside voice. The Wanderer, and the sage. So let's have a look at these three separate voices and see how they play off of each other. Who liveth alone longeth for mercy, maker's mercy. Though he must traverse tracts of sea, sick at heart, trouble with oars, ice-cold waters, the ways of exile, weird is set fast. Thus spoke such a grasshopper, old griefs in his mind, cold slaughters, the death of dear kingsmen. Now this is the outer layer of the poem, right? This is the outer speaker, the sort of overarching narrator. Do you notice anything weird about what he says in this first little stanza? Two things here maybe that don't seem like they fit together.
Grasshopper.
Not the grass. I mean, the grasshopper would refer to the wanderer, right? Somebody who doesn't have a fixed abode and just sort of wanders about. I'll give you a little hint here. Is weird the sort of idea of Anglo-Saxon idea of fate? Does that sound to you like a Christian concept or a pagan concept?
Kind of sounds like a pagan, but he's referencing a maker.
Yeah. We've got Maker's Mercy. And weird is set fast.
Weird is like your fate, right?
Yeah, weird is, your fate, your destiny, right? This is what's going to happen to you.
So do they just not have a clue what they really believe, or is it just tied in? Do they think?
Well, what we're seeing here is a poem produced by a culture that's in transition between two ways of thinking, right? We're looking at a culture that's recently converted to Christianity and is still holding on to, or at the very least sort of expressing in their art, certain pagan concepts. And we see it integrated a little better into the poem in The Wanderer, right? Which suggests that perhaps the poet is actually, in some way, sort of conflicted in mind in this way. So yeah, you're going to see in a lot of Anglo-Saxon poetry this marriage of Christian and pagan ideas. And in fact, if we think back to the Anglo-Saxon poem we looked at last time, that Caedmon's hymn, you remember how the poem described God in terms of an Anglo-Saxon lord? You will see a lot of Anglo-Saxon poetry in which, Jesus is described as a warrior who gave his life for his companions, right? The early missionaries tried to translate these stories, these concepts, into something the culture they were talking to understood. So the wanderer speaks, "Alone am I driven each day before daybreak to give my cares utterance. None are there now among the living to whom I dare declare me throughly, tell my heart's thought. Too truly I know it is in a man no mean virtue that he keep close his heart's chest, hold his thought hoard, think as he may." What do you think a thought hoard is?
How he feels his beliefs, maybe.
Pardon? Yeah, it's your mind. Yeah, your thought hoard is your mind. But because he's not sharing it with anyone, right? He's thinking of it in terms of a kind of treasure hoard, right? I've got this pile of thoughts stored up that I'm keeping for myself and not giving to anyone else. No weary mind may stand against weird, nor may a wrecked will work new hope. Wherefore, most often, those eager for fame bind the dark mood fast in their breasts. So must I also curb my mind, cut off from country, from kind far distant, by cares overworn, bind it in fetters. This since, long ago, the ground shroud enwrapped my gold friend. Wretched I went thence, winter wearied, over the waves bound. Dreary I sought hall of a gold giver, where far or near I might find him who in mead hall might take heed of me, furnish comfort to a man friendless, win me with cheer. So, what is the speaker's basic situation?
Can't find a keeper.
One at a time. That was a lot of voices. Anybody?
He's kind of down in the dumps, because he can't find a group to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, because his Lord is gone, and he is traveling the seas trying to find a new one, right? Someone else to serve. And so far, he has met with no success. What happened to his Lord?
God.
Dead. Yep. Gone. He knows who makes trial how harsh and bitter is care for companion to him who hath few friends to shield him. Track ever taketh him, never the torqued gold, not earthly glory, but cold heart's cave. He minds him of hall men, of treasure giving, how in his youth his gold friend gave him to feast, fallen all this joy. He knows this who is forced to forgo his lord's, his friends' counsels, to lack them for long. Oft sorrow and sleep, banded together, come to bind the lone outcast. He thinks in his heart then that he his Lord claspeth and kisseth, and on knee layeth hand and head, as he had at other whiles and days now gone, when he enjoyed the gift stool. Awakeneth after this friendless man, seeth before him fallow waves, seabirds bathing, brooding out feathers, snow and hail swirl, hoar frost falling. Then all the heavier his heart's wounds, sore for his loved Lord, sorrow freshens. So we have the same kind of imagery of the past we had in the ruin, right? This imagery of sort of the distribution of wealth, right? When I was young and I had a Lord and I had friends, right? We made noises in the hall together and our Lord gave us stuff and it was great. Now I'm out here with the lonely seabirds. And seabirds are a conventional image of the wanderer in a poem of this type. Why? What about a seabird seems to relate to this character's situation? How is he like a seabird? Yeah, he has no set place on land, right? What were you going to say, Matthew?
They don't stay in one place too long, and they're usually on the move all the time.
Yeah, always in motion, never settle. And a seabird rather than a land bird, right? You are cut off from life on land. Right, so you are floating about in your little boat, and you've got no place to go. Remembered kinsmen press through his mind. He singeth out gladly, scanneth eagerly men from the same hearth. They swim away. Sailors' ghosts bring not many known songs there. Care grows fresh in him who shall send forth too often over locked waves his weary spirit. Therefore I may not think throughout this world why cloud cometh not on my mind, when I think over all the life of earls, how to stroke they have given up hall, mood-proud thanes. So this middle earth each of all days ageth and falleth. And there ends the wanderer's speech. That's his part done. So he's there to describe his past and present situations, right? He is there to give you an example of what it's like to live without friends or Lord. And then the narrator's voice comes back in. Wherefore no man grows wise without he have his share of winters. A wise man holds out. He is not too hot-hearted, nor too hasty in speech, nor too weak a warrior, nor wanting in forethought, nor too greedy of goods, nor too glad, nor too mild, nor too eager to boast, ere he knows all. So, what's the narrator's editorial comment, then, on the wanderer's speech? What's the wanderer lamenting? Yeah, his glory days are gone. And what's he stuck with now? Yep, nomadic life, memories, and a kind of unending winter, right? Right, it's cold and frosty on the seas.
So like the narrator's kind of saying like, all this is necessary for you to, it says, no man grows wise without you having to share winters, like he says, it's almost necessary
Yep.
for this guy to go through this.
Yeah, that a wise man would see this as a necessary phase of development. Good. This is a learning experience, though you do not recognize this wanderer. Right? This already represents an advance on the ruin, right? In the ruin, there is not a second voice coming in and critiquing the speaker's reading of the place. Right? The speaker just tells us how great this place used to be and how it has fallen to ruin. A man should forbear boast-making until his fierce mind fully knows which way his spleen shall expend itself. A wise man may grasp how ghastly it shall be when all this world's wealth standeth waste, even as now, in many places, over the earth, walls stand wind-beaten, hung with hoarfrost, ruined habitations. The wine halls crumble, their wielders lie bereft of bliss, the band all fallen proud by the wall. War took off some, carried them on their course hence. One a bird bore over the high sea, one the hoar wolf dealt to death, one his drear-cheeked earl stretched in an earthen trench. The maker of men hath so marred this dwelling that human laughter is not heard about it, and idle stand these old giant works. A man who on these walls wisely looked, who sounded deeply this dark life, would think back to the blood spilled here, weighed in his wit. His word would be this: where is that horse now? Where are those men? Where is the hoard sharer? Where is the house of the feast? Where is the hall's uproar? Alas, bright cup, alas, burnished fighter, alas, proud prince. How that time is passed, dark under night's helm, as though it had never been. There stands in the stead of staunch thanes a towering wall wrought with worm shapes. The earls are oft taken by the ash spear's point, that thirsty weapon, their weird is glorious. Storms break on the stone hillside, the ground bound by driving sleet, winter's wrath. Then wanness cometh, night's spade spreadeth, sendeth from north the rough hail to harry mankind. In the earth realm all is crossed, weird's will changeth the world. Wealth is lent us, friends are lent us. Man is lent, kin is lent. All this earth's frame shall stand empty. So how are the sage's reflections different from the wanderer's?
Like, all this was inevitable, like it. She's not lamenting, like, oh, this used to be so good and now it sucks. She's like, well, this was always going to happen. Kind of, that was kind of the tone.
Yeah, the sage seems to understand the inevitability of destruction and decay, right? That all years end in winter. Nothing lasts forever. No pleasures last forever, no pain lasts forever. Right, and this is that fatalism that you detected in your initial readings of the poem, Kevin. Yeah, this is, look, these things are going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. So the best thing for you to do, Anglo Saxon warrior, is bend yourself to Weird's will. Now, what's interesting about this whole maker and weird thing in the context of who says what in the poem? Do the specifically Anglo-Saxon characters, the wanderer and the sage, do they ever mention the maker? But they do talk about weird, right? Only the narrator, only the sort of outer voice ever mentions the maker. So what might that suggest about the composition of this poem, about how it was put together?
The narration was added later, maybe, or just...
Yeah, it's entirely possible that the narrator's voice is something that was added to the poem late. And he might even be, the poet might even be weaving together two older poems and using that narrator as a kind of connection point, right? As we certainly don't have that in the Seafarer until we get to the very end of the poem. Right? We read through the Seafarer, and suddenly we're not in verse territory anymore. There's this long prose bit on the greatness of God that doesn't seem to have anything directly to do with the rest of the poem, right? This was a fairly common thing to do. Christian monks who enjoyed the older heroic poetry would often try to justify their enjoyment of it by trying to rewrite it and recast it in a specifically Christian frame. Okay, so now that you have a little bit better grasp, I hope, on how this stuff works, I'm going to give you the last 10 minutes to work a little bit on your poem. See if you can improve it. See if you can add a kenning to it someplace. Right, see if you can make one of these work in your poem. And if you have questions, if you need help, I am here to answer for you. Yes, Megan is a writing tutor. That's what she's here for.